Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. This amazing conversation with Gill from Australia comes to you in the form of a double episode. Fish, as he refers to himself, has so much wisdom to share. I already knew from before we started recording that it would not fit into the usual 45 minutes of this podcast. I knew Fish from Instagram, where I became intrigued with his approach of conscious communication. Listening to some of the podcasts where he had been a guest, I've been so drawn to what he shared in his capacity as a coach and through his unique approach. In episode 51 and 52, he takes us through how he dealt with his own grief, using the approach of conscious communication with himself. First, he honestly acknowledged and validated all his thoughts, then felt into the actual emotional experience. From there, he entered the field of his yearning and the longing in his heart, which he recognized and honored, even when it, in the case of his loss, could not be met. Bringing loving awareness to the whole experience without wanting to change it makes every component of the experience matter. Fish says we are not usually bringing loving awareness, but we are trained to respond to pain by usually either dismissing, minimizing, comparing, assigning fault, understanding, or fixing it, when what it actually needs is to be validated. Okay, I won't say more, but I can promise you with certainty that if you listen to one episode, you would want to listen to the other. I recommend you start by the first episode, number 51. About this week's guest. Gill, aka Fish, is a heart coach, yoga teacher and transformational facilitator based in Australia and working internationally. He is committed to the global spread of conscious communication practices that enable all beings to experience love in every moment, which appears to have gone missing. Make sure to check out Fish's links, his website, and most importantly, his Instagram, and enjoy today's episode. So if you want to listen to the first episode in this conversation, go back to episode number 51 and start there.
So I've started to think of loving awareness as, like that image of the kind, benevolent grandmother or grandfather. Some of us never had that person, right? So maybe some of us have never had any person in our life like this, but picture the person who can come to you in an hour of need and they can just wrap you in their arms and they can rub your back and they're not fixing it. They're not doing anything about it. They're just right here and they're just like, yes, yes, yes. And so there's this safe container for you to actually just be in your experience and it gets fully recognized. And you have this sense that like every part of my component matters. So every component of my experience matters and it's all just being held and loved. And bringing loving awareness to our experience it's not naturally what we do. And now I kind of support people to discover how they otherwise respond to pain. And there's a bunch of ways that I've discovered. First is like our pain is dismissed, right? We tend to dismiss it. We're just like, oh, well, I shouldn't be feeling that way. As if that's going to make a difference. But very commonly we dismiss our pain and we dismiss the pain of others.
Yeah.
And when you think about back to like being parented, very well-meaning parents would have come up to us when we were small and we were in pain and they would have been like, get over it.
Or it's not so bad.
Like, don't carry on. No, don't cry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was still my generation where boys were told to not cry because it wasn't boy-like, wasn't manly.
Mm.
So that's the first thing is like just a dismissal.
Yeah.
And then there's the minimized, which is just like, is it really worth all those tears? Like, sure, there's a bit of upset too, but like, aren't you kind of turning it on a bit?
Mm-hmm.
You've learned this strategy of minimizing our pain.
Yeah.
Like I shouldn't feel quite so much. I shouldn't be so emotional. Many of us have learned to even identify ourselves as I'm overly emotional.
Yeah.
Because we've been around the language that says, can you please minimize what you're feeling a bit because I'm finding it a bit hard to deal with?
Mm.
And then another approach to pain that we might have been trained in by our parents is comparing pain to other pain. So, here I am sharing about 2 losses in my life. And I imagine that there are people in your listenership who have been through things that I couldn't even imagine going through. And when I'm preparing for this call, my mind is already saying, oh, I don't know if my grief measures up.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this mental way that we think that pain has to be compared to other pain to see if it's even worth mentioning or acknowledging.
Exactly. That's what a lot of people say. Well, child loss is the worst loss. Well, it doesn't really help because everyone grieves at 100%. Everyone has the pain 100% of what they have lost.
Of what they have, exactly. It reminds me a little bit about, like being young, and my mum didn't say this, but I would go to friends' houses and their mum would say, when I'd had enough to eat and leave a bit on my plate, they would be like, well, think of the starving kids in Africa. So my fullness got compared to someone else's emptiness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, that's a very, very well-meaning intention behind that approach. But look at how it actually gives us this notion of don't trust your feelings.
Yeah.
Then another approach that we've been trained in is pain has to be someone's fault. And I imagine that for grieving couples, there can tend to be a little bit like right at the bottom, secretly, whose fault is this, that this happened?
Mm-hmm.
Where can we trace it back to, actually? Does it lie at your feet or mine?
Yeah.
And you've got this unconscious belief deeply woven into our psyche and deeply woven into our society that if there is upset, if something has happened to create pain for someone, then someone has to be at fault for it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of self-blame and guilt.
I'm either blaming myself or I'm blaming someone else. But blaming me or blaming someone is not the same as bringing loving awareness to my pain. Like, they're not the same thing at all. But we're often fascinated by fault finding instead of recognizing the pain I'm in and practicing bringing my loving awareness to it so it can be held and validated. Another approach that we have around pain is that it has to be rationally understood, like that it has to be explained. So people go, oh, I understand why you're feeling that way. But emotions are not rational. They're just what arise. And so the more obsession we have around trying to understand why, the less attention we have on what. Because you can almost hear that why is trying to find out the rationale so that we can do something about it. So it's a point of resistance, really. And finally, the final sort of approach, which is so widespread, is that when we've got pain, it needs to be fixed.
Exactly.
Pain means something's wrong. And if something's wrong, we need to do something about it to make it right. And so, I see that all the time in couples that I work with. One person will express their very real pain and the other partner will already have gone into suggesting about how to fix it, instead of what's really required is, let's bring our loving awareness to the upset that you've got. Let's actually just encircle the emotional experience you're having with our awareness so that it gets to be bathed in love. So, all of those different ways, dismissing, minimizing, comparing, assigning fault, understanding and fixing, All of those are very natural approaches to pain, and none of them just wrap loving awareness around our pain. And so I call that final approach validation. And so for me, what it looked like, as well as journaling on the page, was me curling up in bed at night, getting all the pillows in the right spot, like taking extra care to make myself incredibly comfortable and cozy, and then reaching out and holding my hand, interlacing my fingers, or sometimes kind of hands to prayer, but often interlaced fingers. And then I would think about what pain and what yearning in me needed my loving awareness wrapped around it. And I would say things to myself like, I'd call myself fishy because all my sisters, my mum, my closest friends call me fishy. So that was kind of the most tender expression towards myself. And I would say, fishy, I see how incredibly sad you still are. I see how furiously angry you still are sometimes. And that makes sense. And you have every right to be so confused. And look at how deeply you've been longing to reconnect with her. And look at how willing you have been to stay and to try and love her back into your life. And God, that makes so much sense. And I love that in you. So see how I'm bringing the voice of like the loving parent, maybe that we never had, but still the sort of the loving awareness voice around components of my pain and components of my yearning that just kind of arose in that moment, that I'd inquired about and got clear about, that exist within me.
Yeah.
And day by day, that didn't feel like it was doing anything. I would often cry myself to sleep or feel a bit frozen, or some nights I'd lie there and I couldn't even speak what I needed to speak. I was too numb. But over the course of about 6 months or a year, I realized that I had been deeply meeting my own needs to be recognized. And it occurred to me as I started to share that approach with others that there's no one on the planet that knew the extent of my pain and the extent of my yearning like I did. And I had wanted the world to see it. I'd wanted her to validate my pain and yearning, and she was unable. She was too lost in her own deep grieving process, and so she should have been. I wanted my friends around me to feel into my experience as deeply as I wanted it felt into, and they couldn't. Like some were just like, oh, I don't know why you're so upset about that.
Mm-hmm.
And other people were like, wow, that must be really tough, but I don't quite know what you're going through. And even my closest people would do an amazing job at getting close to it, but they couldn't get right into it because it's not alive in them. And so that final piece for me was ultimately, I mean, of course, in relationship, I want to be attuned to, of course, you know, a relationship, a romantic relationship or a sibling relationship or a friendship is deeply fulfilling in any moment that I feel someone is attuning to me, right? But at the same time, there's no one on the planet that can honor my pain and honor my yearning to the depth that I know they need to be honored. Is that making some sense?
Yeah.
I became the authority on
Exactly.
honoring myself.
And now I'm thinking about my listener or my client, and they are in this deep, raw, early grief, those that I'm thinking of right now. And I guess to some degree, I'm fulfilling kind of a role like you were describing you did with yourself.
Yeah.
And my guess is that, for example, especially grieving parents feel so supported because they have an idea that I get their pain. But I always say that I really get my own pain, and I can relate to certain parts of you, but really the pain that you're feeling with the loss of your child is very unique. And I can lean into it, but it's very unique.
Yeah.
So, and I guess it also brings up fear, because the question that came for me when you were talking was, but how long did it take for you to feel some relief? And that's the question that people in grief will ask. How long will I have this pain?
Yeah.
When will it stop? When will it get better? Will it ever get better? Do I want it to get better? Because this is also my connection to the person that I've lost.
Yes, absolutely. I think that recognition that our pain is uniquely ours can, on the surface of it, be very lonely realization, right? It can be like, well, if no one really gets it, how do I ever feel supported in this? But underneath that is the beautiful truth that I can bring loving awareness to my pain in a way that no one can. So no searching out there for the kind of recognition of my pain and yearning is going to be as powerful as me learning to bring that to myself masterfully. And no one can stop me from doing that.
Exactly.
I'm not reliant on anyone. Now, I'm not talking about just tuning out from the world and severing your relationships, but I am talking about what it would like to become, what it'd be like to become masterful at constantly tending to my emotional experience. Yes, of course I feel that way. I have every right to feel that way. That makes so much sense. In the context of what's happening in my life, it's the perfect set of emotions. Of course it is. That kind of loving awareness towards ourselves starts to build an invincibility, because most of us have been trained to look outwardly for that kind of love and recognition, which when it comes, fantastic, but when it can't come, we're stuck unloved. So being able to practice ways, and I often ask my coaching clients, I'm like, what are the ways that you are finding to bring what we might call loving awareness or non-judgmental awareness or kind attention to your experience? How do you do it? And some people say, I find objects that represent those things and I put them on the mantelpiece and I touch them every now and then just to acknowledge them. And other people say, I take myself out on adventures and I spend some time actually kind of reflecting on what I'm feeling. And other people journal and other people write songs and other people, so very, very kind of personal ways. But just the notion of bringing loving awareness to all the components of our pain and our yearning. What the heart longs for needs to be recognized for it to be fulfilled, even if we can't get what we long for. Acknowledging the longing is a sense of fulfillment.
I think that it
suffers with.
Yeah, I think that's the key part in there, because if someone has lost someone to death, there's inevitable always option B. They have the life without that physical part of that person. They have the emotional relationship, which they also have to learn how to be a mother of a dead child, in one example. But the other side is, they have to bring agency, and it's in a part where they are so vulnerable. Like in early raw grief, I see people, they are so vulnerable. It's like, it's difficult to even tend to yourself. So,
yes. I think honoring that ongoing love that you can't, once you love someone, you can't turn that tap off. And when we try to, it's just pain. So if we're able actually to keep alive or to acknowledge the aliveness of our love or longing towards someone, like, if, there's an aspect of me that still honors the fact that I love that woman and she's no longer in my life, and I would never communicate that to her because it wouldn't be appropriate in her world right now. But there's an aspect of me that, in order to feel deeply fulfilled in my heart, I must honor the fact that there's still love there. because to turn away from that is just going to put me into a place of like incompleteness and irritation and shut offness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Keeping my heart open is about honoring both my pain and my yearning, because they're the two aspects that when we bring loving awareness to it, the heart goes, there's some softening of the heart when its two realities get honored.
Yeah.
And we're the only ones who can do that as deeply as we need.
And I think that's where also, when you mentioned about honoring that love that you still feel for her, that's where we, or in general, people get challenged with certain beliefs that society upholds as, for example, you have to move on, get over, the notion of forgetting in a relationship breakup, in a traditional relationship sense. And it's that notion that sort of brings people, well, but when they come to me, they say, well, how do I move on? How do I let go? And well, what we're saying here, well, what if you didn't have to let go or move on in the traditional sense?
Yes, absolutely. I'm reminded of my mum bringing, when we have Christmas all together, me and my siblings and my mum, she brings a photo of her late husband and she puts him on the table. And, you know, that's just the way that she gets to keep honoring her devotion to him.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, she longs to be in another relationship and she longs not to.
Mm-hmm.
She would love the company and she would feel like she's betraying him. And those two things, those two incongruent truths are both real for her.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's this other notion about incongruence. Like the heart, you know, our emotional experience has incongruent parts.
I like
And
that. Tell
if we
us
try
more.
and make it congruent, if we try and make our experience congruent, we'll have to turn away from parts of it.
Yeah.
Just a few examples of incongruence. I had a friend ring me about a year ago and he just said, I'm just about to sign the papers to buy a house. And I was like, how is that? Like, I was going to say, that sounds exciting, but I was also like, I can hear this upset in his voice. I said, how is it for you? And he was like, I'm really confused. And I said, tell me more. And he said, well, I just want to buy this house. And I said, talk to me about why you want to buy the house. And he did. And he went on for 5 minutes or so about, you know, perfect price, great location. It's going to be so fun. My partner loves it. Da, da, da. And then I said, and I just could feel this coming. And I work a lot with incongruence. So I said to him, tell me how you don't want to buy the house. And he was like, what? And I said, I have a sense that there's also part of you that doesn't want to buy the house. And he was like, you know what? I think you're right. There's this and this and this and this and this. So he listed all the things that made him reluctant to buy the house. And I said to him, it sounds like you want to and don't want to. And he went, oh. He said, thank you. I think I'm clear now. And he hung up the phone and he went and bought the house. But what shifted him was permission to know that he could want to and not want to at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, for example, feeling justified and guilty at the same time, or feeling love and hatred at the same time. Those incongruent emotions are quite likely to coexist.
And there's an incongruence there that many people who are grieving experience and they're challenged with. And maybe you can say something about that. It is when they're grieving someone, it might be a husband or a child, and then joy comes in again in their life in small doses. And they're confused, well, how can I grieve and feel joy?
Yes. Yes, exactly. And so I imagine when someone checks in with them and says, how are you? They feel like they've got to pick a side.
Exactly.
And it's not true to say they're just in grief, because there are these glimmers of joy. And it's not true to say I'm actually really joyful, because what about all the grief that's present every day or every night?
Yeah.
And it's very unusual, isn't it, for us to answer the question of like, how are you going? To say I'm in the deepest joy and the deepest grief.
Mm-hmm.
But it's probably more accurate to do that than it is to, you know, try and create some congruent answer for us.
I guess we are thriving to have it simple and clear. Like I'm thinking about today. Today is my girl's birthday, not just one, but the one that gets to celebrate, the one that is here, the one that is turning 12. It's the only one that is here. So, I mean, in my heart, I have learned to hold both, and I'm not, it's both girls' birthday, but obviously there is a tinge of sadness that this girl is not 12. She's never going to be 12, and the other one is. And then people sort of say, well, you need to think about your living child or whatever, certain comments that they make.
People
or
want you to choose sides.
Yeah, or my daughter, for example, one of the examples maybe we can talk about is interesting because it really stirs me. She has been, she has been told in school, for example, when they ask kids, oh, do you have any siblings? She then says yes, and then she mentions all of the ones that she doesn't have, but I carried. Now, I specifically, I mean, obviously very much carried her and her twin sister, and I have photos and everything, and the miscarriages, they're just in my heart, but she names to mention them all. So she confuses certain other kids. And then some adults have said to me in the school, well, she shouldn't just be leading with that story. And I say, why not? It's part of her story. But I obviously she also gets some kind of messages that she shouldn't. And I mean, I'm very vocal about that. She can tell whatever she wants, but it gets her into situations where kids say, well, you have a sister, your twin sister? Don't see anyone. So it's like it's not congruent. Her situation, her heart tells her, well, she has all these siblings, specifically her twin that is with her, but she cannot really, or she has been told not to bring it up, so she's in this place. I mean, she's 12. She can figure out her own way. And still, it's something that's going on.
Yeah, beautiful. So, isn't that a really beautiful illustration of the fact that she goes about honoring what's true for her experience, the love in her heart, and the belonging that she gets from her fitting in with other siblings that aren't alive with her. So there's such a beautiful, pure expression of that for her. And then because she's talking about death and miscarriage, then naturally other people's pain is evoked.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are again noticing that in our society, pain is to be avoided.
Mm-hmm.
Pain is not to be spoken about. My beautiful daughter, who's now 23, I think it was probably in about year 4 at school, 4 or 5, one of her friends, a boy that was in her class, lost his father.
Mm-hmm.
And when that boy came back to school after having maybe a week or 2 off, everyone in the class, out of a misguided intention of caring for him, were told not to talk about it.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Can you feel the heartbreak in that?
Yeah.
Everyone thinking, I don't want to upset him by asking him about how he feels. I don't want him to feel uncomfortable or put on the spot or vulnerable or like he's crying in class when everyone might tease him for crying. So I'm actually just going to make things easier for him and not talk about it. And I remember she came to me one day and she was talking about it. She was like, yeah, we've all decided we don't talk about it. And I stopped for a moment and she said, what's up? And I said, I'm just feeling the grief of his loneliness in this significant loss that's happened in his life. And now he goes back into a world where no one talks about it. And so he has to be alone.
It's a double loss.
Yeah. He can't actually honor his grief with his school friends because you're all too busy trying to not upset him.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we'll find often in the judgment or advice or support of others around us is an expression of their pain in response to our pain.
Mm-hmm.
So someone will step in and say, I think you should be moving on. I think you should be focusing on your living daughter and not reminiscing about the one who didn't live. What they're really saying is, I'm suffering seeing you suffer, and I want your joy, and I've got some ideas about how you might find more joy. So please do that for me because I'm sad at your sadness. I feel guilty at your fear. I feel uncomfortable and are like just irritable, and maybe it's bringing up feelings of like, I don't know if I've been a very good friend to you through your grief. So my advice will be, let's just do something that focuses on something great.
Yeah.
And that beautiful, well-meaning advice or support or encouragement actually leaves us feeling like our grief just got put in the other room.
Invalidated.
Yeah. And look, sometimes that kind of support might be wonderful, like someone grabbing you by the hand and saying, let's go and see a movie so you can stop thinking about it. If that's what you need, wonderful. But, you know, we live in a society which isn't wonderful at recognizing the validity and the beauty actually of grief and pain. I was in a group program the other day, and someone started to touch on some sorrow that they were experiencing. And immediately then they said, I'm sorry to bring the mood down.
Yeah.
As if we think the mood should be up.
Yeah.
As if we think there are positive, socially acceptable, buoyant emotions that are good to talk about because everyone needs to hear about good things. And that the things that are more tender and more heavy and more weighty, we shouldn't talk about those because I don't want to bring things down. And I said to them, what is it about sorrow that you think brings the mood down? What if it's actually wonderful for us to speak about sorrow, even though it might be naturally uncomfortable for us? What would it be like if we become more masterful at staying present to our sorrow and the sorrow of others? So, you know, we culturally, I'm going to say certainly in the Australian culture, we tend to go, oh, don't mention that thing. Don't mention that thing because it's been very upsetting for them. So we don't want to upset them, because if we upset them, they might get uncomfortable. We might get uncomfortable. Can we just keep it light, please?
You know, when I first came to Australia, so I'm Australian as well, but when I first came to Australia, people said, no worries, mate. And at the beginning, I was like, okay, that was something so unusual for me and the culture that I brought to. It's like a hello, how are you? It's like, no worries, mate. And you know, when you said before about apologizing for feelings, and this is so common, and a lot of people listening can relate to this. I'm sorry when they cry. I'm sorry for whatever emotions that probably are on the no pile, right?
Yeah.
And we still have them.
Exactly. And I think it can be a really lovely thing, rather than, you know, we're very naturally moved to say, I'm sorry if we're crying, because we've got a kindness towards someone else and we're recognizing that it might leave them feeling their own sense of hopelessness or disappointment or discomfort. So I think instead, you know, one thing to try is, instead of just saying, I'm sorry for crying, we can actually say, thank you for allowing me to cry. Because we're still pointing to what it takes in someone to be around our emotions.
Yeah.
But we're not doing it in a way that we naturally kind of dismiss or feel bad about our very real experience. Thanks for being someone I could just cry with. We'll leave someone feeling acknowledged for what it took, because it probably took something. Like for most people, for someone to break down with us, actually it takes a bit of like, okay, this is happening. I got to be present. I won't pick up the phone. I won't keep driving. I'll just be here right now. So it does take something to support someone in their emotionality.
It does.
So just that little bit like, thank you. Thanks for being here to witness my sorrow. Very bonding experience, actually, to thank someone for their presence. To be acknowledged for the presence that it takes to just be with someone's emotions, because most of us have been trained out of it.
I mean, I feel that great honor that people entrust me with when they come and see me, because I get to be that person that they are willing to, and allowing themselves to be with the innermost and most heartfelt and deep and challenging emotions in their lives.
Yes. Yes. Love that. It's the deepest privilege. So when we come back to this probably quite common experience of having, if we're grieving and we've got people in our life who are saying or doing some things that are maybe advice giving or support giving that actually just leave us feeling really unsupported. A beautiful approach there is actually to see if you can determine behind what they're saying or doing what they're longing for, what they're hoping for you, and what they're hoping for themselves. So it may well be once you start to feel in behind their unwarranted advice or encouragement for you to like chin up and move on. If you can feel in behind someone who might be saying, hey, I just think you should focus on something positive for now, and you feel really kind of left with your very real grief, if you want to kind of bridge that gap, you might be able to say something to them which really starts to directly speak to their yearning, which might say, thank you so much for how much you want me to feel joy. Thank you for how much you're hoping that over time I get to lift out of this darkness. I love that about you. I love the extent to which you're ready for my joy. I'm just not ready for my joy yet. I actually really need to still to express my pain. And that doesn't mean that I don't recognize how much joy you want for me. I see that you want peace and ease for me. You know, it's the same thing as, you know, when a parent comes in and says, I don't think you're making the right decisions about your career, to actually feel into the longing of that parent and to say to them, thank you for wanting the best for me. Thank you for wanting the financial stability for me that you value. Thanks for wanting that kind of steadiness in my life. I love that about you. It's not where I'm at personally, and I love that you want the best for me. I love that you want joy for me. I love that you're encouraging me to feel more joy. I love that you want distraction from this pain for me. Thank you. So rather than dismissing them, we're actually speaking to the yearning in their heart that has them take the unskillfully supportive actions that might land upon us. And if we are the support person, just notice if your advice or support is trying to get them out of their pain.
Exactly.
And instead recognize the greatest value you can be in terms of your support is actually be a safe place, a safe container where they get to feel exactly what they're ready to feel. And that can feel very uncomfortable sitting with someone in the depths of their pain for months or years. But the greatest help you can be is, I see what you're going through. It makes sense that you're sad. Of course you're angry. You have every right to be guilty. And I'm right here with you in all of what you're feeling. That's the place that the heart wants to be met.
Perfectly
it doesn't
said.
want to be pushed into a different place.
Yeah. Perfectly said. I could subscribe to everything you just said. It's exactly what the best place is, to just allow these people to be with where they are. If they're still angry or if they're still feeling guilty, that's where they are at the moment.
And I'm right here with you. And I can't be right here with you.
Exactly.
I see your grief. I see your sorrow. I see your anger. I care for you. And I can't be right here for you right now because it's bringing up such pain that I'm struggling to be present with you. Like, to be that honest, whether we have the capacity to stand next to them in their emotional experience or not have the capacity. It doesn't mean we're a bad person if we don't have the emotional endurance to stand with them in their enduring grief. It doesn't make us a bad person.
And this is why there's people like you and I.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It doesn't make you a bad friend. It just means that you're getting clear about your capacity. Because I think the worst thing we can do as a support person is pretend to show up for someone and not have capacity to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Fish. This has been enlightening, and I think we need to listen to this multiple times to get all the nuggets of wisdom and insight and understanding that you share so eloquently. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been such a privilege. Thanks, Natalie. I'm grateful.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.